Hello, how are you guys doing? My name is Chris A. Matthews, and you are tuned into the Marriage Underdogs Radio Show. And once again, we have a phenomenal couple. I'd like to introduce you guys to Bernard and Jacquelin Thomas. Hello, how are you guys doing?
Good.
Fine. How are you?
Thank you for having us.
Oh man, I'm doing well. Thank you for coming on. As you guys know, in the seasons of marriage, you have ups and downs, and it's so important to have the opportunity to hear from other couples. Especially you guys, you were on the brink, I believe, of 34 years.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. As you know, a lot of marriages don't get to that 7-year mark. You know, half of the divorces usually occur within that first 7 years. So before we go any further, I want to learn the story. I want our listeners to hear, how did you guys develop the foundation that's been 34 years and count?
Well, we were introduced by his best friend, and my best friend at the time. They were dating, and so they introduced us. And I would say we became friends first. And next thing you know, we were getting married 6 months later.
Yeah, 6 months.
Nice. And that's very common. When you look at the top ways couples are introduced, they usually will meet at work, they'll meet at church. But actually, one of the ways that couples meet, even more than online, is by way of a mutual friend or acquaintance. So that fits the bill in terms of how you guys met. And just to set the tone for the title of this episode, we're going to dive deeper into discussing how you both have support one another in sickness and in health. When we think about the marital vow, right, to be committed to this partner in sickness and in health. And I just think that a lot of couples will falter or decide to break up when things become uncomfortable or when there's a discomfort that we can't control. So I want to begin by giving you space to share, over the 34 years, what was one of the moments where either you, Jack, or you, Bernard, were incapacitated due to illness, and your partner had to step up and carry the load in order to help you get back to where you are now in terms of 100% of health?
I would say Bernard has pretty much, he deserves a medal in that area. Years ago, I was really sick. I was in the hospital for a couple of weeks. My grandmother had had a stroke, so she was living with us. My husband took care of the kids. He took care of my grandmother while I was in the hospital, basically fighting for my life for 2 weeks. And he never once complained. He did what he had to do. Then there was the chronic panic disorder, which I suffered with. And at one point in 2016 had become a bit agoraphobic, where he would come home, and he had to bring food to me because there were times I couldn't even go out into the living room. I was almost a prisoner in my bedroom. And I realized that had to be taxing for him to work all day, to have to make sure that I was eating, to worry about me, because I know he worried, to deal with teenagers at that time, to deal with, I think, grandchildren at that time as well. I think at that time we had about 12 people living with us. Wow. My daughter has 5 kids, so it was her family, my son. I think we had a niece, our nephew, somebody was there. But anyway, it was a lot of people. And again, he deserves a medal for everything that he went through.
Wow. Well, let's unpack this for a second, Bernard and Jackie, because for starters, let's highlight that when we talk about sickness and health, or illness and health, you had mental illness that you were battling with the panic disorder. You had physical illness as you're in the hospital fighting for your life. So those that are listening, when we think about health, we usually may have some idea of, okay, if my partner got in a car wreck or if there was something physical, battling cancer. But you guys have endured a mental health storm and a physical health storm. So Bernard, Jackie talks about how you should win a medal because you were there supporting her through these endeavors, not only just your wife, but the entire family and extended family. Talk about the ingredients when it comes to what you had to exhibit as a man to develop in that household the strength to show that level of support. So what was it in you as a man that enabled you to give your wife and your family that level of support during that time of illness?
Well, I guess to start, I'll have to give all the credit to my dad, being my model. I just did what he did. He showed me the ways. I act the way he act. I did what he did for my mom. I did what he did for extended family. All these things, I didn't create none of it. I just did what my dad did. So I always grew up that way. It was all modeled that way. It was always in me. And I thank him for order, because if I wasn't a person with order, then it may have been chaotic for me to do all that. But I keep things in order. I keep people in order. And that way it makes it easier for me to be able to accept what my wife's going through. When it came to the panic disorder, that was something new, something unfamiliar. I probably seen it, but didn't know what it was. To me, I guess at first it seemed like excuses or something. It didn't seem real. It's, how can you say you're going through that when there was nothing to start it? You know, you think of things as being a reaction to an action, but if there was no action first, it's like, okay, that doesn't make sense to me. So it took some time and some episodes for me to try to fully understand what she was going through. But I thank God for patience, because I was patient through it all.
So I'm hearing patience, but before we even go any further, you mentioned initially that you give the credit to your father for setting an example.
Right.
And what I'm thinking about is men who may not have that example.
Right.
It sounds like having some mentor. So if you don't have a biological father, or if your father wasn't a good example like Bernard was able to see, then finding a male figure and being willing to drop your pride as a man and say, hey, I'm going to learn from another man.
Right.
And when you think about the relationship with you and your father, talk about that for a second, because there are a lot of men that have good fathers, but they still don't model the behavior of that father. So your father had to develop a relationship with you in order for you to trust that behavior to exhibit within your own marriage as you got older.
Right. My father was a truck driver over the road, so he wasn't always home. But when he was home, he was able to be there. I played sports. He made as many events as he could. And when he was there, he was always the loudest person there. So I know when he was there. I remember back when he came to see me play basketball, maybe 6th grade. After that, he went home, tore up half the sidewalk in the backyard, laid a sidewalk, brought me a basketball goal, and gave me the tools to be successful with that. And that's the way he always been in life. If what I said I wanted to do, he always gave me the tools to be successful with that.
And I'm glad that you mentioned your father, because on this interview right now, we're breaking generational curses. If you're a man listening now and you have children, the way you parent those children now, especially your young boys, you're setting up the foundation for that son to be a father, to be a husband in the future, and exhibit characteristics and traits if and when their partner's ill or sick. Because the foundation for your behavior comes from the modeling that your father gave you when you were a child, Bernard. That's what I'm hearing. And I'm glad we're taking time to go back to the origin, because the question is, not only did you have the skill set, but where did those skills come from?
Right.
And they came from dad. And you mentioned patience. Jackie, what other skill sets did you feel from your husband during those moments of illness?
During the panic disorder, I have to confess, I didn't exactly feel patience, you know, because initially he did think it was maybe some type of excuse. He didn't understand it. I didn't understand it, you know. So we were both navigating the sea that we didn't know, we weren't familiar with. I feel like I'm dying, and the only thing I can tell him is that I feel like I'm dying. I think that when we were traveling and we were going across a bridge, and the attacks would hit, as you know, panic disorder, that fight or flight kicks in
Right.
You know, you never know when. And so when I almost jumped out of the car because I wanted him to stop, I could not breathe. And I think when he practically had to drive and keep me from jumping out of the car. And I think that was probably the moment that he realized something was really wrong. And then it was also when we went to see the therapist for the first time. And but even though I felt like at times he was a bit insensitive to what I was going through, I still knew that he loved me. I still knew he was my protector. I just knew we didn't know what was going on with me. And it was really scary.
Well, Jackie, one of the things I'm hearing is that through the midst of navigating the panic disorder, you first had to both decide to do it together, right? And I heard Bernard and you both say, hey, we didn't know what was going on, but I heard we. And then I also heard that even through the midst of this discomfort, you felt like your partner was still there to protect you.
Yes.
And it also sounds like as you navigated it and then obtained the treatment, he was right there with you to go to the counselor as well. And it didn't sound like you were ever abandoned by your partner.
No, I never felt abandoned. In fact, I think, to be honest, he may have been there so much that he became a bit of a clutch, where there were times when, for example, the same way with his father, that his father did for him, what his father did for him, he did for our son. And so when my son played sports, my husband changed his schedule where he would work nights so he wouldn't have to miss my son's games. You see what I'm saying? So, but those nights were torture for me because he wasn't there and I wasn't able to really sleep. And a lot of times the attacks happen at night. So he became a security blanket for me.
Right, right.
And so he became a bit of a crutch.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And within that, it sounds like, Bernard, you were still present. You had to change your schedule because you wanted to be a present father.
Right.
You decided to accompany your wife. She did the counseling. And initially, there can be a discomfort or disruption because neither of you had experienced that before.
Sure.
And Bernard, you mentioned you didn't know what was going on. But what kept you? Because unfortunately, in my line of work, I've witnessed partners leave. So talk about what kept you there. What you stand on to stay present in the midst of these storms?
Well, first of all, when it comes to marriage, my mom and dad were married until she passed. So I never think about divorce. When I say about it was a learning process of being patient, I said I'm sure I wasn't at first, but I remember when we used to have to travel to Virginia Beach, and there's no way of getting there without crossing a tunnel or a bridge. So I would drive to the Department of Transportation and ask them, what is the shortest bridge that you have for me to get her there? Because there's no way other around it. So that's what I mean by I've learned things to be patient about, because I know before me, I have common sense. I think I have a good deal of common sense. Well, this has nothing to do with common sense.
Mm-hmm.
This is beyond common sense, because common sense doesn't address this issue. It doesn't address mental health, because it's, to me, it's separate.
Mm.
So I had to learn to step out of common sense. I had to learn to look at her and try to understand how she was thinking, how she was feeling, and take me out of the picture. And that took a while.
And it
But
sounds like empathy, right?
I thank her for that, because before marriage, I didn't have empathy.
Say that again. People in the
Before
back.
marriage, I did not have empathy.
So before marriage, you didn't have empathy.
He was not empathetic when we got married.
Like, it's all common sense.
So let me tell you why what you said is so valuable. For those that are listening, when you get married, you may not have the skill sets needed to stay married. you developed new tools and skills and adapted to stay and grow in marriage. Sometimes we look for specific skills in our partner during the courtship phase, but there was a potential. There was something in you, Jackie, that knew in Bernard he could get that empathy, right? Because he didn't have it before you. And it seems like that should be the goal of marriage, to be with a partner that can make you better than how they found you. So talk about what it looked like to help Bernard develop that empathy.
I would say we helped each other because I'm a communicator. And when we first got married, no marriage is perfect. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it. And so we would have these moments where we were just not agreeing, and I wanted to not let the sun go down on my anger. So if that meant we stayed up all night, we were going to work this thing out. Well, I quickly learned, and I think maturity set in, that that's really not the way. Sometimes you have to table discussions because it's getting nowhere. You're going round and round and round and round, and you end up in the same spot. So I think it's a level of maturation too. So as we continue to grow, I learned to kind of see things his way. I like to think, and I feel like he learned to see things my way, but I had to approach him a certain way. I could not be accusatory. I had to use I statements. And, this was before I was in school for counseling and all of that. So I didn't know anything about I statements, but I quickly learned when I talked about how he made me feel versus you did this, you did that. He listened. And so I quickly learned what would make him shut down and what would make him listen. And so sometimes it was as simple as, well, put yourself in my position. If roles were reversed, and sometimes then he would see it.
Gotcha.
So,
but the foundation of everything you guys are saying starts with commitment, right? So when you began to experience these attacks, the mental health illness, the physical illness, for starters, we knew there was a commitment. There wasn't talk about divorce. Is that what I'm hearing?
right. Mhm.
So that's important for people that are listening. Second, Bernard, we can't underestimate the fact that you went to communicate to the highway patrol to identify the easiest route. So you took it upon yourself to be proactive. How can I be involved in supporting my partner? And sometimes that looks like involving other people, because you could have said, I got it myself. No, let me seek out help. Let me identify the path of least resistance to support my partner. So you were still applying common sense and logic, but you were focusing it in on how to support your partner. That's important for people to hear. Now, I want to ask you guys, throughout the midst of going through these health journeys or physical health and mental health journeys, what did you do to keep hope?
I would say our faith. I think it had to do with our faith, and focusing, because I had to learn that I had to allow my faith to be bigger than my fears. And I had to really learn what that meant. And so for me, it meant going back to school and studying psychology. That was the reason, because I wanted to understand how to beat this. I wanted to understand, how do I deal with this? How do I live with panic disorder? I'm not a quitter. I've never been a quitter. And so I needed to find a way, the tools to beat this. I wasn't dependent on him, but I will say he was my motivation. I didn't want my husband to have to be on the road. He's a truck driver as well, to be on the road worried about me. I wanted to take some ownership in my own recovery, and I wanted to make him proud,
Wow. I'm gonna just pause for a second, because it's easy to see yourself as the victim. I'm the one that's sick. I'm the one that's dealing with this. I'm the one that needs help. But you reversed it, Jackie. You said, okay, because I'm the one that's dealing with this, I need to make sure I'm in front of the line when it comes to finding solutions. I'm going to be the one that beats this. And then the last thing you said is, I'm not only going to beat this for me, but I want to beat this for my partner. I want to beat this for our marriage. And those that are ill right now, you hear all the time that when someone is sick, you have to be there to care for them. But I'm hearing you also sustained a level of authority to care for yourself. And what did that do for you, Bernard, when you saw your wife who was ill, still putting effort to get better and to take ownership over her own treatment?
Well, I knew I wasn't the one going through it. She was the one going through it. And at no point, I'd never see her really just accepting it and giving up. And she's one of the smartest persons I know. So I know she'd do her own research on getting herself through. Sometimes we have to hold her back on diagnosing herself, but I knew she would work herself through this. There was a moment when I was like, okay, when she wouldn't drive, I'm like, what motivate her to drive? What could I do? What could I say? I said, we need to cut you off my insurance. Well, I'm paying money, you ain't driving a car. We don't need two cars. I thought that might motivate her a little bit to want to get back out there. And she never just gave up and accepted it. She'd always try to figure something out. And I always just try to, like I said, be there. Once you tell me that this is what you want to do, and I see that this is what you want to do, then I'm all there to back you up.
And what you're saying is an important lesson. It's easier to support someone who's willing to support themselves.
Yes.
It's easier to help someone when you see them helping themselves, right? It's almost like those electrical bikes. You got to start pedaling a little bit before the assistant steps in. So you had to start pedaling, Jackie, and then the assistance of Bernard was able to step in because he witnessed that it wasn't going to just be you dragging him. He didn't have to drag you. You were going to do this together, right? And I just want to thank you guys because you put on a master class on what being there in sickness and health looks like, right? What would you say, and I'm going to start with you, Bernard, what would you say to the husbands who are currently with a spouse who is ill, whether it be mental or physical? What would you say to them for levels or words of encouragement?
Just to always be there and, first of all, take you out of the picture. If that person's the one hurting, you got to try to come from their perspective. They can only tell you how they feel. You can't tell them how they feel. So you have to believe in their truth.
That's important, believing their truth. And Jackie, before I turn to Jackie to ask her the same, Bernard, one more thing. Talk about what men can do to help themselves sustain a level of strength while they're trying to be strong for their partner who may be ill or sick.
I guess for me, it's faith. Knowing that somebody has my back. Knowing God has my back. Someone who doesn't believe in that faith, I guess, is surrounding themselves with strong people, with strong men. Like I said, make sure you have that someone that you can go to help you through. Be strong for your wife, but you can be vulnerable for somebody else. So having someone close to you that you can stand help you stand strong.
That's so important because as men, we tend to want to do it all on our own, and we clam up when we're having a hard time and we go away from people versus toward other people. So that's important. If you're out here listening and you're supporting a sick spouse, find your tribe, lean on your tribe, find your group, find those that can empathize. And what I like about what you said, find people you can be vulnerable with so you can be strong for your partner. That was good. Jackie, I want to ask you, as someone who had been experiencing these illnesses, battling through, what would you share to partners who may be currently battling and fighting through an illness? What would you share to them in regards to how they can still help their partner help them?
Communicate. Definitely, you communicate. Do not allow someone to invalidate your feelings. Is that person's perspective. It may not be the reality, but still, you don't allow someone to invalidate what you're feeling. have those discussions. I don't feel good. This is why I don't feel good. Go to the doctor with me. If you don't know what it is, ask your partner to go with you, um, find out together, but for me, I think it's important to not give up, not to give up, because sickness is when you're sick, you don't feel good. You're tempted to just kind of lay around, but don't give in to that. Try not to give in to that, to fight for you. When you can't fight for you, fight for your loved ones, but communicate and talk to them, and not have secrets, and not be ashamed of, because for me, I was ashamed to tell him when I would have panic attacks. I wouldn't wake him, because I was embarrassed. That shouldn't be. That's when I needed him the most. But I think it taught me to rely more on God. So it was kind of it worked in my favor, in that I shifted from relying on him, but relying on God.
Right.
But it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay if you're in pain to say that. And you shouldn't be ashamed. You shouldn't feel weak. So that's what I would say. If you're sick, don't be ashamed of it. Don't allow shame to have its space, because if you do that, it can actually make you sicker, because it affects your mental status, and a lot of times if you give up mentally, then your illness may get worse.
Manifest to be worse. Yes. Now, two things you said there, Jackie. The first, which I love, and I want to make sure everyone heard this: invite your partner to attend the appointments with you, whether it be a therapist, whether it be a physician that's helping you get the treatment. Invite your partner in. The other piece you said along that same line was, don't be ashamed or afraid to inform your partner about what you're experiencing. And I like that, because communication can breed understanding. Because if you're not telling your partner the frequency or the intensity of what's going on, then they can't comprehend the severity. So for them, they don't know what they don't know. And then the last piece, you mentioned how initially you were relying on Bernard, and then you took that reliance to God. I think of a stair stepper, right? Like Bernard was the step that led you to rely more on God.
Yes.
And when we think about marriage in the Christian sense, right? You leave your mother and father, become one with your spouse. Bernard did his job as a husband to be a catalyst for you to step upon him toward God, right? It's almost as if Bernard was there to point you toward God. And that's what husbands should be. We should be the beacon. We should be the conductor to help our spouse get closer and build their faith, not rely just on him. In other words, if you would have just relied solely on Bernard, that wouldn't have been enough. There had to be a power beyond just Bernard. Man, that's special right there. Man, you guys have been a blessing. I'm sure. Yeah.
Educate.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Educate.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about our backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
Books. That's a real backdrop. I mean, those are books. That's real. When something's going on, I know I can come home and look at the coffee table, and there's going to be a book on that.
Mm.
So not only does, if something happens, she's going to get that and put it in front of me for me to see, for me to have the knowledge as to what's going on, not just take her word from it. So educate yourself on what that person is experiencing, to know the most that you can know, to help you understand what they're going through.
And Bernard, you make a great point. You educated yourself, but you had to be open to receiving your partner's influence.
Right.
Because Jackie may have had a book, or you might have found a book for yourself, but you had to be open and willing to receive that influence from your wife to read that book, versus looking at it as an attack or belittlement. You saw that as your wife inviting you into the process. And a lot of times, men in particular, we want to fix things and we want to be there to solve a problem. Well, Jackie was giving you the tools to help her fix what she was going through. And you had to trust and receive her influence in order to do that. And I want to highlight that part too. So those that are listening, when you give the partner the book or the resources to help them help you, they have to be open to receiving that. And you were open to receiving that, it sounds like.
Yes.
Definitely. Man, you guys are just such a phenomenal couple, 34 years, and to have endured all of the struggles and challenges together. And I like to tell couples, it's not if you're gonna establish a marriage that's gonna have hardship or pain, it's when those hardships and pains are gonna be present. It's inevitable. And you guys are such a model for other couples to see that that doesn't have to destroy your marriage. And just to recap, you talked about commitment. You talked about being willing to receive help. You talked about if you didn't have a good model of a father or a mother who supported each other as spouses, find those examples. Find other people. You talked about resources. You talked about educating yourself. You talked about also advocating for your own treatment and not just taking a victim mentality. You talked about having patience. You talked about being willing to accept your partner's influence and go and seek out plans of actions to be a supportive figure. For Bernard, that looked like calling the highway patrol and finding the shortest route with the least bridges and the least tunnels because your partner was having panic attacks that were triggered by the environment. You also talked about being willing and able to show up. You showed up and you did not waver on your commitment. Wow. Anything you guys want to say in closing to other couples or in general?
I would like to say for anyone who has a sick spouse or, suffering physically or mentally, to separate that person from their sickness. That's important because you have to be able to love this person and still love this person in spite of what they're going through. And so they're not their sickness. It is something they're experiencing. It's not who they are. And so if you are dealing with this, please learn to separate the person that you love from what they're going through.
Amen. That's beautiful. Jackie, you are definitely a clinician in training. I love your narrative approach, extracting the problem from the person. You were, going to be such a blessing. You guys are now, just a disclaimer, you guys do pastoral care counseling for couples now within the church. So that is something that is just huge, because to model a marriage that's endured illness is one thing, and then to decide to go help other couples is another. And we just are so thankful that you were willing to share your story on our show, because we understand your story is a gift, and to share that gift with us, we're very thankful. And I want to speak not only for myself, but all the listeners that are going to be blessed by this episode.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Definitely. So those that have been listening, you've been tuning into the Marriage Underdogs Radio Show. Once again, I'm your host, Chris A. Matthews, and you've had the opportunity to hear from Bernard and Jackie Thomas, who spoke on how to endure through the hardship of illness and sickness and continue to sustain your marriage. And just as a reminder, we have new episodes dropping every Tuesday at 10 a.m. on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Once again, thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to bringing you a new episode next week. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.